So I would like to start first with Jennifer on the far end. So Jennifer Feller, she graduated from this amazing school, Harvard Graduate School of Education, in 1998 and is a longtime environmental advocate, science educator, entrepreneur, and school founder. And is currently working as the Senior Climate Educator and the Statewide K-12 Director of Mass Audubon, which is based in Lincoln, Massachusetts, but you just live down the street, which is so great. And she focuses her work on K-12 climate justice and environmental literacy. And prior to her work at Mass Audubon, she was also the CEO and co-founder of a company called ReFleece, which is a redesign and remanufacturing company founded to inspire reuse of materials by both consumers and companies. And Jennifer is also a former consultant, working with nonprofit charter schools and startups at the intersection of business and social impact. And she also holds a BS in biology from Yale University. So welcome, Jennifer. Next, Jennifer is Meredith McDermott, who joins us today from New York, who is the Director of Sustainability for the New York City Department of Education within the Division of School Facilities. And to give you a sense of how big that is, there are over 1,850 schools with 1.1 million students. So that's very impressive. And the department oversees operations and compliance for waste and utility management, as well as outreach and educational programming, which she'll share in more depth. And prior to her work in New York, she also began sustainability efforts for the Chicago Public Schools, another very large school district. And she negotiated the first district-wide recycling program and also started a commercial composting pilot program to mitigate food waste and assisted efforts to replace foam lunch plates with compostable options. Just hope you tell us more about that as well. And she's a biologist by education. We just had a fantastic conversation that we're going to bring to your attention with an MS in marine biology and an MS in environmental management from the University of Queensland, Australia. And she's passionate about advancing leadership in sustainability and bridging the gap between science, education, career preparation, and youth. So welcome, Meredith.
Thank you.
And we have Margaret Wang. Margaret Wang graduated from the Harvard School of Education in 2020 and is the COO and co-founder of Subject to Climate, which is a nonprofit organization empowering all educators to easily and effectively teach about climate change, justice, and action. And prior to this, she was a high school teacher, primarily in economics and business, for several years before she pursued her international education policy at this fantastic school. While a student at Harvard, she also supported and edited several books regarding education reform and climate change education. And she received her teaching certification at Princeton University. So we're gonna have a fantastic conversation about their personal career journeys and what they're doing now in their work. And I'm excited to kick off the conversation. I wanted to first start with Jennifer. If you could just share us a little bit about your own personal career journey from the time you graduated from the program here to how you currently got into the role that you're in right now.
Okay. A long time. Let me know if I'm using this properly. Does it work?
Oh, you gotta just hold it down a little bit longer.
Oh,
yeah.
Screen. Yeah. That was a long time ago. So I went to Hudsey because I had been a teacher and wanted to become a school founder and director, and did that. Gosh, the journey was windy. That's what everyone ends up saying, and it's true. The journey went this way and that way and the other way, and ended up for a while in the private sector trying to start this business, which we did, which was amazing. Highly recommend doing horizontal leaps in your career because you learn a completely different skill set, and then that helped enormously when I came back to environmental education, I went through what was called the Mass Challenge, which is a startup challenge, and had all sorts of mentors from the world of business, and that was remarkably helpful coming back into then Mass Audubon and thinking about how are we going to scale what we're doing, how do I think through the entire business plan of this initiative rather than just the content of the initiative. So doing those horizontal leaps helped. I did work across the country in also supporting struggling schools. So I also have a lot of years of sitting on the floor, watching classes in struggling schools in underserved districts. So that also helped me as I think about climate change education now and environmental education writ large, having that perspective of having come through schools rather than just Harvard and thinking about schools changed quite a bit. I highly recommend that if you are headed into some sort of educational field, you spend time teaching and or in schools, and not a variety of schools. It's too long a journey to go in the details, but I think that covers some of it.
Yeah, fantastic. And then the same question, Meredith.
So mine starts a little bit earlier. I'll do a little snippet of my earlier life. It kind of helps things to make a little bit, well, maybe it doesn't make more sense, but I like to think it does. My family moved around a lot. I'm from Southern California originally. We moved around a lot. We moved. I always say my parents ripped me off the beach and brought me to the tundra of the Midwest. Well, in your most awkward years, like 8th grade, thanks a lot, thank you. I always really loved being outside, and I always loved the ocean. I mean, I grew up in it, on it, under it, all of the things. And so going to a place that was vastly different was really hard. I was young. When I was in high school, I started to try to think about, like, I kind of miss that. How do I do this? I went down to the aquarium in downtown Chicago. They didn't have any youth programs or internships at that time. And I basically was like, can I just come and like follow people around and I'll clean tanks. I don't really care what I have to do. And they actually brought me on. I mean, they didn't pay me anything. I just kind of went a few times a week, but it was kind of like the seedlings of passion were in me pretty deeply. And it was kind of cool to start recognizing that at a pretty early age. And so when I went to college, I went to University of Illinois, and the reason that I did that, I got admitted to Stanford. I was actually going to go back out west, but I had a feeling that I wanted to go overseas. But doing it right then was a little bit complicated. So I was like, I'm going to start, but I don't want to spend a fortune on my education. I want to kind of go somewhere that has access to a lot of different programs and universities overseas, exchange programs, study abroad programs. Jumped in, long story short, I ended up doing 2 years of my undergraduate in Melbourne, Australia. Loved it, got to really dig in a lot more deeply to the things that I loved, and I essentially lobbied to create my own Bachelor of Science degree. I graduated with a degree that I don't know that anybody else has it. And it was just because I was relentless in the pursuit of doing it. It made perfect sense to me, so I just had to make it make perfect sense to all of these different faculty. And I was able to do it. I went back. I started off with a hard science master's degree. I was doing marine science in Queensland, Australia. Great place to study that. It's like I was saying before, it's like a kid in a candy store. If you love the environment, if you love nature, if you love plants, animals, ecology, it was just like a bonanza all the time. Everything was so interesting, and I just got to do a lot of really interesting field work and research, and was really very much on the academic path. I realized pretty quickly in thinking about pursuing a PhD, whether right then or afterwards, I kind of started thinking, I don't know that I see myself in a lab. I think that, I don't know, I feel like I've got something more in me, but I didn't know what. I was just a science person. That's just what I thought I was. And I had an amazing professor who had lived all around the world and was a big fisheries, like sustainable fisheries biologist. But he was the guy that knew everything about fisheries and what impacted them, what climate change, what's happening that's really altering the dynamics of all of these complicated ecosystems. And so just a fascinating person, and also a very nice person. He was willing to listen to me and answer my questions. And so I realized that, he was an expert. He was the one that was really advising on a lot of policy, really working with a lot of people to affect change, not just talk about the things that are changing. And so really adding that human dimension is something that I sort of grabbed a hold of, sort of viscerally. And I pretty much the next day asked to see if I could add another master's program, and that's when I picked up my sustainability. It's environmental management and sustainability at the same time. I did it both concurrently. My path ever since, I stayed in Australia for a while. I lived there for about 6 years, did a bunch of conservation work, but really ultimately found my passion for working with people. And the fact is, like, you can talk about, I mean, again, my passion is really the ocean, but the environment, you can talk about the trees and the plants and the ecology all you want, but if we're not talking about the impacts that humans have on those things, you know, you have to know what you're talking about, but you also have to know how to help protect it. And that really is the human side. And so I kind of tackled that. I like to think that I still am driven by that very same passion now. I came back to the States. I started working. I got kind of an interesting job with it was a nonprofit organization, but also had kind of like a very small quasi small business kind of startup field. But it was essentially a marine biology, it was a wildlife biology and ecology, like aggressive, not aggressive, that's not the right word, but just a really hands-on immersive program for kids of all ages, including college kids. So I
want to
taught.
know what the name of the aggressive marine biology. What is
Meredith McDermott. Yeah, well, I know, I say these, I'm hyperbolic in my speech, I guess, but that's just how I am, what can I say? But I really found I designed this program, and then I got to teach it. So I was not only thinking about what resources, what do kids really gravitate to, what concepts are they really interested in, how can we help, what are the best vehicles for igniting that passion and having those aha moments in kids, and then working with teachers and then administrators, and really sort of understanding more not only the needs of educators, but also, of course, the gaps. I mean, there's so many needs endlessly, and this amazing content area, I thought, was kind of like, let's bring this together and have this really be something that can really kind of ignite this next generation of, you know, whether it's young scientists or whether it's sustainability change makers. And I really, really love doing that. It was a very limiting type of job. I learned that I loved education. And I, meanwhile, had a lot of personal things going on. Best friend of mine passed away suddenly, not to get too into that, but you know, these things matter, life matters. There's other things to life than just your job and what you're trying to do to make a living. I always knew I wanted to do something that I loved. To me, that was always a non-negotiable. I've stuck with that my entire life. It's taken a very windy path, but I've stuck with that as like the main thing. And I'm very glad that I did. I went back to Chicago with all this stuff going on. I went back to Chicago. There was something in the universe telling me I should. I ended up getting the first sustainability job at Chicago Public Schools. So I'm a sustainability person. I'm not from the education system or government person who just wanted to get a government job and it happened to be in sustainability. It's the opposite, right? I found myself in public education. You mentioned the compostable plates. When I was at Chicago Public Schools, I got sent last minute on a trip to Maine to go visit. We were trying to eliminate styrofoam plates from school meal service, and working with a small group of urban school districts across the country. New York City happened to be one of them. So we were going to go to a manufacturing facility for the potentially new compostable plate. That is where I met my next boss. So it was a couple months after that, he reached out to me and said, "You want to come to New York?" Yep. So that was almost 9 years ago, almost exactly 9 years ago. I am a little bit bashful to say this, but I'm not telling you to make this about me. Director of Energy and Sustainability, I am glad to tell you I'm actually now the first Chief Sustainability and Decarbonization Officer for New York City Public Schools. It has been 9 years of building and building and building and pushing and pushing and pushing. So we are no longer in the division of school facilities. We're actually now much more at the the highest levels of our organization. Those are the people to whom I now report as of more recently, and that is really just meant to expand the scope of our work even more. So 1,900 public schools, infrastructure, operations, and people. People being the most important and the most fun. So yeah.
Amazing, amazing.
So my journey began quite early in the education space, actually. So for most of my life, it was separating education and then sustainability. I cared about, but it was also in my personal life. So I told everybody when I was 5 years old that I wanted to be a teacher. So then I actually became a teacher. And I told every year, we were like, what do you want to do when you grow up? I said, teacher. And that was always in my vision. And I knew I wanted to do that. So when I graduated from Princeton, I was the only person in my year in the teacher program. The only person, because everybody else is like, yeah, we're going to get a consulting banking job and make more in the summer than you'll make in a year. So, and to the point where, you know, like, it's hard because it was something as, I think the theme is like, you know, you gotta go with what you're very passionate about and it'll take you where you need to go. But the hard thing was it was also a winding path. Coming from a household of immigrant parents, I didn't tell them that I was getting a teacher certification because I didn't want them to know I was going to be a teacher afterwards. I don't know how long I was going to use that. So when I did graduate with the teaching certification, the first place I actually went into was not into teaching because I was too scared of my parents. I actually went into ed tech. So I started there and I love like having, I completely agree with what you said, like being at a startup is a great way to learn skills, doing everything and just figuring things out. And so we worked at an ed tech startup. It was great. We were doing learning management systems, student information systems, learned a lot, but then felt this funny feeling that like, you know, I was like, but how am I supposed to be a product manager for all these school systems when I don't know what it's like to be a teacher? And I wanted to be a teacher anyway. So I mean, that's one of the things that we talked about, like being in education is really helpful to be in the school environment, right? So I went ahead to be a teacher. My parents knew about it, it's fine. But I ended up becoming a teacher and I taught high school social studies, finance, business, and economics. Loved it so much. But because I kind of made that stand against my parents, I needed to financially support myself. So there's always a way around. So, you know, I got a job offer in San Francisco. I was like, I don't think I can afford a teacher salary in San Francisco. So I actually, you know, after getting my teaching certification in New Jersey and doing student teaching, I actually went into the international school system, which was really, really interesting. So I lived in the Middle East. I taught in Bahrain. And it was a fascinating place to be and teach. And all my kids like cared about climate change. And all my kids, they were here because their parents are working in Saudi Aramco, the oil fossil fuel industry. And it was just so fascinating. In any case, I didn't teach about climate change. I was so stressed as a first-year teacher, second-year teacher, stressed third-year teacher, stressed every year because I taught IB and the test scores really mattered, right? And my job's based on my student test scores. And even though my first year teaching, my kids loved the class, my kids scored below the average. And that's what mattered in the job. So it wasn't until, and on a side note, all this time I love running. Who doesn't in Boston? So I've been a runner for several years. I did ultras, I did triathlons, and I cared about the environment. And I learned all this not through anything besides an undergrad. There was like a sustainability field trip a pre-orientation, and that's where I really found my love of nature. And so that's been a part of my life, but I was able to bring it into my classroom when I felt more comfortable teaching, and I saw my students really engage with the content. And so the chapter on market failure externalities, which everybody hates, and everybody hated that We talked about climate change. We talked about what is the true cost of meat. We talked about all these fascinating topics, and I just can't forget that like a student like who was held back actually really I saw her being engaged that year. So that's why I came to Hugsy. I was like, that was great. Like, how do we bring more teachers? How do we help teachers teach about climate change when they're just trying to get through the day? So I started this nonprofit organization, and I think we started 4 years ago. So after I graduated Harvard Graduate School of Education, that's been the journey ever since. And it's great because we all know each other because this world is small, and it's a great world to be in. So that's kind of the journey.
Amazing, amazing. So I'm just gonna go the opposite way now, if that's okay. So could you talk a little bit about Subject to Climate and your mission, and a little bit about what you do on a day-to-day basis, and where you want to go in the next couple of years?
Yeah, so Subject to Climate, I think Leslie already talked about our mission. Just to highlight what we're trying to do, if you take the story of what I said about a teacher that's struggling, like thinking about the next day, we want to empower all educators, all grade levels and subjects. So think kindergarten teacher to high school PE teacher, high school art teacher to teach about climate change. So the first thing we did was talk to other people, talk to teachers. Walk me through the last time you tried to teach about climate change. What were some of the challenges you faced? What's one or two things that could have helped you? And all in all, everybody said that it just doesn't fit into what I already have to teach. And there's a lot out there already. And we just need, we just want to know what's going to help us teach the next thing. So what we ended up doing was we curated, because knowing that there's already so much out there, the first thing we did was I was subject to climate. I was like, oh, tell me what subject and grade you teach, and I went and found a resource for them, and they're like, oh wait, that really works. And then we created this nonprofit organization. We're a free platform, we're online, we aggregate resources across all grade levels and subjects and make it easy for a teacher to find it. And then we also train cohorts of teachers to create example lesson plans of what it looks like to integrate it into what you already teach. Because teachers know what works best in the classroom. So since then, we've been doing state models of creating state versions of our hub to support efforts among all states. And it was so funny to circle back that New Jersey became the first state to have climate change education teaching standards. So we work with New Jersey and to create a New Jersey hub, and now that's kind of the pathway that we're going, where we're creating more state hubs, because we know that a lot of states are just doing climate education and forgetting to think about how do we support teachers. So that's who we are and what we do. My day-to-day, so I'm a co-founder. I'm so lucky to have a co-founder. It's very important to have a partner in this who's a retired business person. So I met in the Harvard community through the ALI program. So the ALI program is Advanced Leadership Initiative for retired executives, retired business people, retired folks who want to do social impact work. So we met through the Harvard community, and we could not be more different people. He was in VC, he was in retail, an executive, and I was my background right now. So we found this subject to climate together, and so my day-to-day is it changed from year one versus year two versus year three. Year one was a lot of testing out things. We didn't use money to test out things. We talked to a lot of teachers, tested, iterated minimum viable products, and for 3 years, everybody when they start an organization, you're like, oh, but we need a lot of money. For 3 years, I had a software engineer for 3 hours a week. So, we did that. So, you can't do things at a very low budget and produce something valuable. We have to talk to your users. So, year one was a lot of that. Year two was building a team. Year three, where we're at right now, or I guess it's almost, we are expanding and trying to figure out how to scale. So, a lot of what I'm doing this year is meeting people, building partnerships, meeting people to build fundraising connections, and building relationships, and also trying to manage and make sure things don't like fall off the trains of the organization. So the day-to-day is a lot of meetings, and working with people.
Amazing. Fantastic. Same
Thanks.
question for you.
I'll keep my day-to-day at the end, I don't know, day-to-day, woo. So I work for the City of New York. New York City Public Schools, largest public school organization in the country by a landslide. It might be the largest in the world. No one can really tell me what the other ones would be. I can take guesses, but it's a beast, right? It's actually comprised of about 40 different districts, but I work on a central level, so meaning we work with all schools. There's no by district. So what we really do, I like to say that kind of like the bread and butter, the reason that we came into existence in the first place was really the things related to complying with the city's recycling laws. And now we have to decarbonize our buildings. We're aiming for carbon neutrality, by 2050. All of these things, there were so many different pieces of policy, building codes, things like that, and nobody to kind of herd the cats. So that's what sort of set the office up many years ago. And it was called, in its earlier years when I was not there were 2 previous directors. They were only there for not even 2 years each. But they did some really amazing things, including setting up the foundation of an organizational policy, which we've tried to kind of barrel forward ever since. But it started with those things, and really was that, and it was called the Sustainability Initiative. So when I came on, we kind of were like, we gotta really start thinking about how we go beyond being a pass-through for advocacy organizations, nonprofit, great community organizations that have a lot of really wonderful activities, lessons, field trips, teacher trainings. They need to get to schools. In New York City, no one knows who to talk to. There's so many schools. An organization, there's a great Audubon in New York City. It's like, they might go down to the school down the street, but what about all the other schools? And so it started off kind of being, okay, we'll help you get the message out. I was like, we have to really take this up a notch. And so the bread and butter, the reason that we exist is all those operational things. It is from those things that we have built a real thing and real movement within the we're trying to more and more within our education system. And one thing that we committed to several years ago is a couple things. So it's increasing, so doing all the things, decarbonizing, reducing as much waste as possible, zero waste by 2030 to landfills kind of thing. But we also are trying to advance climate literacy. We are trying to transform an educational system to integrate climate education across all grade levels and subject areas. And we're trying to center equity and justice as a key priority. We're big believers that, say this sort of thematically, I think, amongst all of us. Teachers, they're busy. They get a lot of things that, you have a mandate, but there's no money, there's no time. They don't even know what it is or how to do it, let alone try to do it well. So that's what we don't want to do. New York does not yet have a mandate. There's, we're part of a much larger movement in New York State to kind of follow suit with what New Jersey has done. And, Margaret and Subject to Climate and New York State across various entities have really been a good model in a lot of ways. They also got the mandate first and had to plan after. We don't have a mandate yet. We're trying to sort of develop capacity build with teachers. We created a group of teacher leaders about 5 years ago. It's been pretty instrumental to really drive forward. It's about 45 teachers. Again, it's representative of schools in very different neighborhoods across New York City. Teachers who do very different things. One of them's a health teacher, for example. One of them's actually a social worker. And then we have a lot of high school science, AP, things like that. So it's a really, we also have civics and things like that. It's very important that all of these things, all of these disciplines are integrated in to this effort. Because if we don't, oftentimes it really historically, sustainability, especially in schools, has really predominantly been two things: science and for privileged schools. So we can do neither of those things. That's not good enough anymore. We have to do more. So the best way to do this is really a peer-led, much like, and I love that story where it's like, I'm a teacher, you have to understand who you're talking to. I'm not the expert. We have a lot of experts around us. So let's bring them together. And fortunately for us, they kind of stuck around. Most of them have actually been part of this teacher leadership group. We've added new members over the years, but we have like the same core group of teachers, which really says a lot. We were able to find a way to pay them. They didn't know that when they first joined. We were still trying to figure it out. I believe very strongly in truly professionalizing climate education. So meaning this cannot just be another thing that teachers get told that they have to do and don't get any preparation or ongoing support to do successfully. It's not going to have the impact on kids and classrooms and school communities that I think we all truly want. So in order to do that, we've taken the harder road, which is let's really figure out and map what are the standards, where can we find this stuff, how do we do these things, and it's really the teachers that are leading the way. One thing that we were able to do a couple years ago, I work for the government, first of all, our city. There's a lot of things going on at the moment, in case you've seen the news recently. But we keep going, this stuff, though politics influence a lot of things, I think that I'm a true believer that sustainability and climate action and climate education, they have to outlast cycles of people, right? I mean, this stuff has to outlast cycles of people. So, we're pretty well trying to kind of stay away from some of this stuff because we have to keep going. It's very important that we do. And so we've really, a lot of policy in the past has not ever, like a sustainability policy or climate strategic plan for a large urban area like New York City, never included education in it at all. I was the main point for doing our piece, the public schools piece of the larger New York City climate strategic plan. This was 2 years ago. And we were at a school building. It wasn't a school itself, it was a school admin building. All of these people, policymakers, but not a lot of them operators or practitioners, implementers, and they didn't have education. They had all the different sectors up of what they thought that this plan was going to be comprised of. What was the one thing that was missing? Education was not in there. I said, I was like, well, if I'm here, basically this has to die now. And I knew it wasn't just going to be me saying that got it to go forward. It wasn't. I mean, it took a year and a half of slogging through and explaining, well, how are we going to do this? And essentially, we finally got the words and a lot of advocates and a lot of really a great network of people really pushing for this to happen. And you can't just have a top-down thing, but you gotta have something that tells people in schools who are very busy and have a lot of competing priorities that it's okay if you take a few minutes to think about it because this is gonna stick around. And my boss told me that, hey, there's this thing. And then my boss's boss, people, especially school principals, some of them only respond to that. You have to formalize some of this and embed it, like institutionalize it. And it's okay if the policymakers, they don't necessarily know all of the implications of it. We have to have it in there. The significance was huge. Now the climate and sustainability plan for New York City, for the first time ever, about 2 years ago, it prioritizes and commits to climate education, particularly in our public schools. We were able to then leverage that to go big with it last year. We created supposed to be like a high leverage point. Let's galvanize, schools. Let's raise the awareness of this, and most importantly, the interest. Increase accessibility. Make resources for teachers and kids that makes it fun. That really connects climate and sustainability to not only their classrooms, but also their personal interests and their communities themselves. No matter, if it's a Title I school or, a school on the Upper West Side that might have a very active parent body, we have to capture all of these things but it cannot just be for the schools on the Upper West Side. It actually really has to be for all the other schools. And that really is, that's the real crux of most of our schools. And so that's been an amazing thing. A day in the life of, I'll give an example that kind of includes some of this stuff. These climate action days that we started last year, again, kind of high profile, got a lot of people interested. We had over 1,200 schools participate in a first year thing. There were climate action days, again, that was just last year. Over 1,200 schools in the first year. They were like, okay, so this is great. And it just kind of grew and grew and grew. We had 4 of them last year. We did a training for teachers. We had about 350 teachers at an event just on Tuesday. A training to help do different workshops about how to do climate action days. Excuse me. I then was also trying to get money to do more of this, build a team. My raspy throat, I talk too much today. Sorry about that, guys. My days are all over. I'm trying to build a team. Oh, sorry, gosh, that sounds terrible. But I have no money to do it. So, excuse me, gosh.
Okay.
It does this sometimes and then it'll come back.
All right.
You want to?
Yeah, we can do that.
I apologize. Again, I totally know what happened. Yeah. Sorry, guys.
That's all right. I think something you said made me reflect on that idea that you need permission from the top. You need something in the language at the top. So state law, something like that, that says, yes, you need climate literacy. But believing that that will actually make the change is foolish in education, maybe in anything. The work happens from the ground up, and the two have to meet. You need both. What it made me think of was my very first job out of college, I think, or one of them, a lot of jobs right out of college, was working for the Massachusetts Department of Education. They had just passed a law, so somebody up top got something written into some legislation saying that adding sexual orientation to the list of things against which you could not discriminate. And that was revolutionary. And about 5 of us, and there was some money from the tobacco settlement, I think. Somehow we got some of this money, and they hired a few of us, and we're like, great, our job is what? Like, I don't know. And there we were, sitting in the Department of Ed, and it was like, I don't know, there's a law. Yeah. And so, a few themes, but still, there's the same thing, which is, A, nobody's gonna tell you what to do. I mean, they will, but it'll be boring. So like, you just need to go figure out a plan and go do it. And so we just started calling around the state of Massachusetts, which in 1993 meant just calling the school and be like, you kind of want to call it, is anyone gay? No? All right, it was like really crazy. And can I talk with the nurse? The nurse won't talk to you. Okay. Can I talk with the PE teacher? She'll talk to you. It was definitely like that. And we just had a ball. And we said, this is the Department of Education call. Oh, it's the Department of Education. We're having a workshop. Okay. You have to send me. Okay. So that's like having the permission from the top. And then the people who were actually doing work, who had been very courageous in 1993, it was a very different world, and they came and we together with them, and I was working with people who had been doing a tremendous amount of advocacy. And so then we created workshops. And I feel like it's the same thing now with climate change, which is, A, you get a job, and now there are some jobs where you can be hired to do climate education. But not many. You're probably going to be hired to do something else. And then it's your job to figure out, how do I make this about climate education, or whatever you want it to be about. And then you need that permission from the top, which we're working on in Massachusetts, but we haven't gotten there yet. Some state law to say, yes, climate literacy, you should be doing it. In the meantime, we just say, yeah, it's in the standards. But it would be good to get a law in there. But in the meantime, don't even worry about it. It's not there yet. Fine, we're just going to keep doing it. And we're going to call the schools and say, who's on climate? Come on, who's on climate? And then we're just going to have workshops and put it in wherever we can. So my job, I was hired to be the director. My job is director of school programs. So at Mass Audubon, that meant lots and lots of field trips, lots and lots of getting kids outside and connecting them to nature, which is wonderful. So you get hired to do one thing, and again, you look and you say, well, what am I gonna really do?
Yeah.
What is my secret mission in this job? And I had 2 secret missions. At first, it was just change the way science is taught in Massachusetts. So get them out of the classrooms, outside, connecting to nature. That was number 1. And then Trump got elected. And all the climate-related research in the United States was in jeopardy because he said, his administration said to take it down. And so the scientists, my colleagues, were panicking. And they were looking for private servers to store the data on. It was a panic situation. And I was like, what the heck is going on here? Climate I knew was bad, but I don't know like I was really out to lunch on this. And I just got myself educated and decided, well, again, it was the Trump got elected thing. And I was like, I guess we have to do it. I guess no one's gonna tell me to do it. I guess we have to do it. So the scientists, I think it was that thing where they were saying, well, no one else is going to do it. The government's kind of betraying us here. We need to grab the data and store it privately. I felt like, oh, we have to do the same thing in education. We just have to do it, whether or not we're given permission to do it. And so I just said, well, we're going to put climate in every single one of our programs. And nobody really objected that hard. Sometimes they did, and whatever, we worked on it. But for the most part, there isn't that much opposition. It's just doing it. It's like you have to get organized to do it. So that's what we've been doing for the last 10 years. We've been integrating climate into all of our programs. And then a few years ago, things shifted. The climate of education shifted a little bit to where we can now say the words climate change and people will sign up. Whereas before, if you said climate change, they were like, no, thank you, that's terrifying, we won't do that. But now, teachers are hungry for it. There's more of an appetite for actually labeling things that way. And so that's now we're starting more climate-specific programming, which is super exciting. All sorts of programs that are blossoming that I'd love to tell you about if you're interested in. But I think the theme is that sense of, well, you get hired for one thing, and then you decide, how am I gonna make this into the best thing there is, and how am I gonna scale it much higher?
I will hand it back to you, but it's hilarious to think about my exact scenario with what you were saying. It's like, how I said that I helped get climate ed in the New York City's policy? Yeah, well, that didn't come with any money.
Right.
There's no money.
Right.
So what I had to do was say, oh, okay, that thing that you put in there, can I have some money, please? And then I had to ask, and I'd ask again, and I had to, stand in front of people and defend it and justify it. And then we got it. Then they took it away because there was a budget cut. I mean, it's just like, this is where you end up, but this is reality, right? Like, being the practitioner, the implementers versus just doing the one side of it. Yeah, I mean, but that was the runway. That was all very strategic. It was like, let's get that stuff in there so we can say, hey guys, that thing that you put in there, well, we gotta do it. Here's how we're gonna do it. And that was quite literally as simple as that. That was like part of my own strategic plan to really advocate and advance climate education in New York City schools. It's like no one was gonna do it. We have to corral the cats. We gotta bring everybody together. We gotta convene. We gotta build, and we just have to do. And some of these things that we're doing now, these programs and things, we're having teachers lead these things for other teachers. So it's peer-led, teacher to teachers, for teachers, by teachers. I love that saying. And that for climate education is really, really, really important to teachers. And so I think that's really, when you think about it like that, and then you think about what your role, like, for me, it's like, okay, what can my role be in it? It's like, I'm trying to push. I'm trying to really build the capacity, but also the real leadership. Because we just don't have the capacity in every school to do this, but we can. If we keep doing this and we keep propagating and connecting with amazing partners, that's how it's happening, and it is happening. New York City Climate Week was a couple weeks ago, and all of the events, again, I do sustainability and all energy management decarbonization. guess what all of the events that I was lucky enough to not only participate in but attend, guess what all of them were about? All of them. They were all climate education.
Really?
All of
Climate
them.
Week? That's
Yes.
a shift.
Now, that's not to say that there weren't others, but yeah, I was shocked that, yeah, it wasn't all energy management tech. A lot of energy tech, clean tech stuff, that was like the major dominant theme the last few years. This year, there was so, I'm telling you, it's happening. It's happening. It's working, and it takes all of these things and all of these people.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I think on that note, I'd love to turn it over to our participants to ask questions of our panelists. So just raise your hand and microphone, I'll bring it over. I know you have questions.
Oh yeah, ask away.
Thank you. I'm very curious to understand, like, I think there are technical subjects like math where you have standards that, okay, at grade 2 you learn this, grade 5 you learn that, and grade 8. I think climate change looks like everything, everywhere, all at once. So how do you split what education looks like at a K-12 level for different levels of students, and are we teaching them at community level, or state, country, international? What does that look like across the grades?
You want to start that?
Yeah, I can start. So how we are approaching it is that, again, it's good to have a framework, and there's actually a lot of frameworks out there. Like I was just telling Jennifer that there's in Wisconsin, they have environmental literacy standards. And so that's a really good basis to look at. Okay, K through 12, what does it mean to at what age, and this is through perspective of Wisconsin, what's developmentally appropriate. And you can also look at New Jersey's climate change education standards as examples of what it looks like at different ages and across different subjects. But that's just one model. These are just examples. And you see patterns where younger students are learning about love of self, love of the people around them, love of nature. And then you see that progress to more in middle schools. You see it's about, okay, moving from self to community. And then you see that in high school, there's a lot of collective action and what's happening in the country and in the world as well. That, again, that's just one model. And so how we approach it is that, there needs to be two things to guide it. One, yes, this environmental literacy framework and standards on where students need to learn. But when you think about the reality, as I talked about, of a teacher teaching the very next day, that environmental literacy standard is not going to really be present in a teacher who's teaching in a 3rd grade classroom at that moment. So I think the New Jersey standards are one model, but what we've done is that teachers actually know the best way to integrate climate change based on the subjects and the topics they have to teach. So the model that we've done is we work with teachers and they create exemplar lesson plans. Afterwards I can share a link so you can kind of explore, well, how has a kindergarten teacher in math taught it? And then I can share that afterwards, or you can just look it up, go to subjectclimate.org, and you can look at lesson plans, and then just browse around, and you're going to see whoa, teachers actually really know what to do. I think they should be given the time and space, and also the platform to share.
I'll keep mine short because you guys are the experts, but it is complicated because it does have to be in everything all the time, right? Teachers are not only good at doing this, they're also good at knowing when to do it, when specifically in the cycle of a school year. And that kind of blows my mind. It's okay, well, that makes sense. But no, let's not talk about this topic then, because in the standards, we have to talk about this topic. It's wow, okay. So that makes a lot of sense, but there's no replacement for the fact that there's no silver bullet answer here. It really takes a very serious, deep understanding of standards. Different states have different ways of doing things, but understanding the standards themselves and understanding on a local level the curriculum that teach those standards, and having climate not be a separate thing. It has to be in all the things, so it's a lens. Where is climate, looking at that through climate as a lens, where is that, again, oftentimes even specifically. So we're just kind of slogging through all of those things, but that's why there's not one entity or one group, you know, or let alone individual or organization that can do this alone because of all the different dimensions of it. And that's what's so complicated about it, but it's also where it's a fascinating educational sort of study, but that integrates all of the social, and of course environmental things as well. So anytime, you know, you're talking about climate sustainability, it's, the greatest challenge is its complexity. But to me, that's what makes it super interesting, and we're kind of trying to help make the roadmap as we go.
2 weeks ago, the federal government released their climate literacy, revised climate literacy standards, and I think it's a very helpful document. NOAA,
Yep.
yeah. I would recommend looking at that. I do think there's as well the question of here's what you teach, and that's what they talk about, but there's also how do you teach it? And those two things together are what I'm thinking of as the roadmap, and that's what we're trying to put together, just starting now, if anybody's interested, in how do we put this together for Massachusetts in particular. So I think every state needs a roadmap because sure you can tell them what to teach, but as you said, but I already have a curriculum. I already have things I'm supposed to teach at every grade. So how do I weave it? Where does it go? What unit gets taken out so that we can put this unit in? What lessons get taken out so we can replace with this lesson? It's quite specific. Everybody wants to go create, like, I'm gonna create an awesome climate curriculum. Like, that is awesome. And no one will do it because they don't have 8 weeks to do an awesome climate curriculum. So they're great if somebody does have that, but again, trying to get it to everybody, like you said, everybody needs it. Then we have to weave, and we have to be very strategic about how to get it in there at all levels and in all subjects.
And we have to actually do it. We have to help them do it. We can't expect teachers to do it.
Yeah.
That's really the main thing. If it is, it's just too challenging. Yeah.
I was gonna just quickly say something. Like you mentioned how to do it. So the University of California and California State Universities have formed a consortium on climate change education, and they actually a week ago just released. So if you think about 2 weeks ago, NOAA has the climate literacy guide on what to teach. I think so. The consortium is called Eclipse, ECC LPS. You look at their website, they just released their 7 shifting paradigms on how you teach about climate change, which resulted from like all the researchers in the UCs and CSUs coming together to talk about how you teach it. And it's like fantastic work, you should look at it because, and then what they're gonna do is break it apart, what that looks like for K through 2, 3 through 5, 6 through 8, 9 through 12. So they have an initial document that just was released. I highly recommend looking at that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Is that Deb Morrison?
She did.
Thank you. You're all hitting on so many themes that are sparking excitement for me. And I think about, to your point on, we used to say in corporate communications, communication is not execution, because you can communicate things ad nauseum and nothing happens if you don't actually have a plan and a roadmap and, to your point, resources. One of the things that I wonder is I think about, the built environment, the educational stuff, the legislative stuff, like how do you prioritize? Because I just think it's all so important and it's so nascent too, and there is no roadmap, which to me is one of the most exciting things. I worked at startups back in the .com bust, and so that went the way one would expect, but I love the creative process of figuring out what could this be and how do we get it there. But you don't have unlimited resources, and so how do each of you decide where do you focus and balance it all? You probably don't do it perfectly, but.
Oh, yeah. You wanna, anybody?
Nope. Trying to think if I have anything smart to say about how to prioritize, like just no.
I can never, I'm sure we could all say this, I don't really have the luxury of prioritizing one thing. What I try to do is prioritize one group, and that's kids. Like we have to prioritize our students. You know, we've talked, obviously the whole purpose of this, we're talking about education and really transformative things that are relatively new compared to a lot of other disciplines and topics, but I mean, developing, you know, we're talking about building teacher capacity and those things. Youth leadership is a huge component of what we do. We kind of, around actually even earlier to carving out some teacher leadership, a team as part of like a de facto part of my own team. We also created a youth leadership council, and this was actually, we're in our 8th year of a youth leadership council, and we started it just literally on a wing of a prayer, like, hey man, you know, I think we need to figure out how to really develop young leaders, and I didn't have capacity on my team to do it, but we're like, we have to do it anyway. And I luckily had a staff member who was willing to stay and host meetings for kids in the evenings, like really, you know, we would go to Costco and get some snacks, and often I paid for some, I mean, it's really just, but now, I mean, we have a continuum of students that, you know, one of the most rewarding things, we had a girl last year who was a senior in high school, a fabulous young lady. She was very excited to tell me at the end of last year that she had gotten into Duke University, and she was the first person in her entire family to go to college. She got a full ride, educational ride, full scholarship, and she was studying environmental policy and law. She was not really interested in sustainability or the environment or climate until she was a sophomore when she came to one of our youth climate summits. That alone, like, sort of represents why I do what I do, as complicated as it is, and it's all barriers. I learn things that I don't necessarily want to learn on a daily basis, new little prefaces of my own organization, and I'm like, that exists? How did I, you know, it's just endless, it's huge. And often antiquated and of course often bureaucratic, but there's so many cool little nooks and crannies, and we just, when we find a nook and cranny, we get our way in there, and I just say we elbow drop in there, and then we figure out from there how we expand. And then we're just essentially doing that everywhere. So my priorities are really ultimately simple, as vast as they are. They're simplified when I just remember this is about our kids, this is about our school communities, and it's about supporting educators to be able to do their jobs and connect this, not only content and important information, this is relevant, societal, global stuff. This is not just about learning in a classroom, this is about learning in life. This is about job opportunities. I think that every job soon is going to be a green job of some type, if it isn't already. You know, there's a lot to be said for that. So essentially, I think it's just a matter of, you know, I have to think a lot about systems at my scale, but I'm a grassroots gal at heart, so you have to always remember the schools and the people that are in there every day. That's what always centers me, and it centers my team. That's what we try to lead with, and it might not work with everybody, but it's working for some. And as long as we're just, you know, propagating from there and really just trying to grow kind of a grassroots style in the largest school system in the world, I'm telling you, we'll get there.
Well, two things occurred to me. The first is that 4 years ago, in 2020, I learned that you can prioritize whatever you want, but if you can't, you have to prioritize your own mental health first. And so I think there were days when I, you know, in the middle of protests happening here and COVID happening here, and we're trying to decide whether to run a camp, where are we going to kill children? Or are we going to save children? You know, it was just so much pressure. And I think learning that I couldn't do 8 hours of work in those days, and I had to go take walks around the block and walks around the block. And I think, so that's number one, is learning to prioritize that so that you just don't lose it. And then in terms of the work, I think there's what I do prioritize and maybe what I should prioritize more. I do prioritize teachers usually at my level of work. I try to help them prioritize students, but I don't teach children directly, I teach teachers. So always trying to think about sustainability, retention, how can we support teachers in their work, always listening. I'd say that's what I try to keep at the center. And what I don't prioritize, but probably should more, is communications. Actually, I'm really quite bad at it in terms of remembering to tell the story of what we're doing, package it up nicely on a website, make a blog post, do social media. This is not my strength. And yeah, I need to do more because I think that is how you will have more impact.
Right, and there's always more things that you want to get done than you can do, so mental health is really important. I have tried to really set boundaries, and for myself, we spent time with our team looking really looking at our vision and mission statement and making sure that's our guiding star on what we choose to do and what actually now more importantly choose not to do. So we do that, and in ed tech as a product manager, you're responsible for the roadmap of the tech product that you create, and 100 billion people are telling you different things to do. And so there was a really useful prioritization matrix or methodology we use. It was called the RICE methodology. So we look at what's the reach of this thing, what's the impact of it, how confident are we about it, divided by effort. And then that helps, just I always think about what's the reach, what's the impact, how sure am I about that, how hard is it going to be, and then it helps you kind of prioritize what to do. And the third thing to do is when you're in an organization or in leadership position, you have to figure out how you can empower others to do things, because you can't be the reason why this work is happening. Otherwise, it's not going to be scalable or sustainable.
I would also like to fully admit that I'm not very good at a lot of these things. I'll admit, I work too many hours. I'm a raging insomniac. That's probably too much information, but this is just, but it's because I'm so thinking all the time and I absorb energy. I'm a total extrovert. I absorb energy, but sometimes that means I'm a live wire. I exercise. Yeah, I know. But it's a challenge with all the stimuli that we all have. It's constant, and then you add but I want to do this, and then how about the priorities, and what about this, and then immediate pressing needs added to the mix. Having to communicate about it. Ooh, but these are all just I'm compelled by it, which is why I said earlier that I knew always from when I was a kid that I had to do what I love, otherwise, forget it. I'm torched. I'm either not gonna do it well, I'm not even gonna try, or I'm gonna be full pedal to the metal at all times. And for me personally, that's just that. I'm unfortunately probably the double pedal to the metal. But it is really, really important, especially when you have a team. You have to, I say, do as I say, not as I do. And I'm joking when I say that, but in some ways I mean it. You don't need to do that. Everybody has their way, and that's okay.
Question? Yeah, you want mine?
Yeah, thank you for the talk. My name is Mohammed. I'm doing a master's at Kennedy School in BA Public Administration with focus on energy policy. So I never had a chance to study climate at school, so I'm taking a climate course now at the Kennedy School. Part of that because I was working in energy sector in Abu Dhabi, specifically oil and gas, and I wanted to learn about the impact of fossil fuels on the climate. So my question is, teaching climate literacy to school, I believe it's going to shift the dynamic of the job market. Maybe most of the jobs will be green, so that will definitely affect the oil and gas industry, fossil fuel sector. So how does that affect, fossil fuel intensive states like Texas do they accept this climate literacy? You mentioned it's a federal climate literacy standard, so does it apply to all states? And how do you make sure it's separate from the politics? For example, if a Republican president comes in the future, can he remove the climate literacy curriculum from the school, or is it going to be there? Thank you.
Yeah.
So the climate literacy standards I spoke of are not mandatory at all, but they are helpful for those who want to adopt them. There are many states who not only don't include climate in their curriculum, but actively prohibit the teaching of climate literacy, or climate change. So this is a state-by-state effort. What I will say is most people in the United States do agree that climate change is happening and that it is human caused, and most parents want it taught in schools, and that is across the states. I'm not sure if it's in every single state, but it is most parents in the United States. Teachers also agree that they want it changed. They want it taught in schools. So you can look at the Yale Center for Climate Communications. They do these beautiful maps. That's a wonderful place to look for that data. What happens though is that people get scared because they think there's opposition. And so then they don't teach it. So I will say, for example, in Massachusetts, we have a strong majority of parents, I think 84%, who want it taught. But lots of teachers say to us, but I'm worried, what if a parent pushes back? That worry is bigger than the reality in a place like this. Now in a place like, we teach in Attleboro, for example, there is stronger climate opposition in Attleboro. It's a more conservative town. However, when we teach it, we have not. We just did it. And then we don't get pushback, generally. So I think some of it is just taking the risk. For if you're working across in someplace else, not Massachusetts, if you're working in Texas, Louisiana, Alaska, strong fossil fuel states, you are going to get a very different political landscape. And I would say there are many ways to teach across that political divide. Sometimes you use different words. Sometimes you might not couch it as climate change at first. You might talk about extreme weather. You might talk about being ready, having our community be resilient. You might talk about economic opportunities. So I think there are many ways to couch what we're doing. I'm a pragmatist. Some people would disagree with me that we should be talking about climate change everywhere. I think you teach where you can and make sure our children are prepared as best we can. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't know if anybody
I had
else
so
has
many
suggestions.
thoughts when you were
Okay.
talking about it.
I don't know if we want to have others talk, or do you want to just ask more questions?
I'll just share something real short.
Yeah.
Is that there was also what's really interesting on our site. Last year we had last academic school year we had 300,000 unique users of our site, and I think Texas was the biggest amount of the second largest amount of users that were using our resources. Can interpret it however many ways you want. I think it supports what you said. And then there's a New York Times article that I think 2 years ago, last year, that was about teachers teaching about climate change regardless of legislation, and they looked into classrooms in Florida and Texas, I believe. And so if you look through that and read through it, it'll be really insightful to see how you're right. Like parents want it taught, teachers are teaching it regardless, and I think that'll be really insightful.
It comes back to South
There's
Ed
also-
again.
yeah,
It's
there you go.
It's all about South Ed. I really like these connections.
There's also, we have worked for, probably almost 9 years with various entities within Columbia University, just a local, it's a great university. With Teachers College at Columbia University, we've got a fantastic professor, colleague, He is a PhD, does international comparative education. Anyway, his real fascination point is climate education, and so fortunately, over the last many years, he has done a lot of research on the work that's happening within New York City public schools, or like so we've worked with them to, okay, let's do surveys of teachers, like getting real in-depth understanding, but extensive analysis of everything from teacher attitudes, motivations, behaviors, those things, but then also from an international landscape as well. So it's kind of zoomed in on New York City, but then expands out to New York State, the country, and then globally. A lot of these trends in climate education, and it's really fascinating, but it's based on, again, extensive analysis of all the different things that each of us really are doing in our daily lives. So there's a lot more there. And you know what, even if a president changes out and maybe they have a different thought on certain things, state educational standards are determined by the state. They're pretty insulated, I mean, for better or worse, but they're pretty insulated in that regard. Like the President of the United States, he or she, sorry, gosh, she, thank you. They're not really the ones they're not getting in the weeds like that, right? So, but this is, you're talking about infrastructure, and it's so fascinating. I think it's a good representation of a lot of this. This is when that just transition, we've all heard these terms. The just transition, if somebody's working and if somebody's a miner, they come from generations of miners, they fear for job loss. I mean, who can blame them? But it's like your job, it's not going to be taken away, it's just going to change, and there's going to be even better things and all of the things, and here's what they are, and let's help train you. And, it's the same sort of concept, as it applies. So that's infrastructure and those things, but it's just a changing landscape. Education is a very dynamic thing. The problems that we find are when it's not dynamic enough. It hasn't been adaptive enough. You bringing in, sex education, like when it wasn't happening. Now, these things are integrated in at an early age in pretty much all schools. So we're kind of hoping that we're in the early infancy stages of climate education, and that one day, many years from now, we'll look back and say, remember when that was not a thing. But it is really interesting to see how much it has evolved. A lot more than you might think, and again, including on an international scale. So Teachers College, I can get resources, and if anybody's interested in looking at any of these things, there's some really interesting diagrams and like digestible data, if anybody's interested as well. I'm sure there's lots of stuff at Harvard too.
Awesome. So this will be our last question.
Well, thank you all for taking the time to talk with us and for all of your work. I feel like I have a million questions, but one thing that I'm thinking about is that, you talk about the interdisciplinary nature of climate change, like what is demanded. And I guess I'm just curious, like, doesn't climate education kind of mean like the entire education system needs to completely shift? And doesn't it kind of point to the problems of like the fact that we have a math class and an English literature class versus, a class that involves young people in learning about, their transportation system and incorporates all of those things? And I wonder, like, is that a pivot point at all? Because I just think that, like, teaching a math class isn't going to change necessarily the way that the people think about. I mean, I love, yeah, you know what I mean.
It's a very intuitive question. Educational reform is definitely, a couple weeks ago when I was at some things with a lot of different people representing different entities, higher ed included, that was actually a big topic of discussion, which is like isn't our education system how we actually teach things? Isn't it antiquated in and of itself, and isn't that sort of at the root of a lot of problems, not just this one, right? And it was fascinating to hear so many brilliant minds speaking about it and like sort of parsing out some of these specific things, but I can tell you that, yes, I think there's a large awareness of this just in general in the field, in the sector, but how you fix it, where do you start, that I don't know that anybody knows. But we know that these piecemeal things and the isolation and segregation of disciplines and subjects, climate is you can't do that with this. You literally, so maybe this is a thing that really pushes, some of this larger reform, but as you know, reform takes commitment, it takes leadership, it takes continuity. And those are often the things, and that's why it's like, this stuff has to go and outlast and extend way beyond any political cycle, because if it does, I think that maybe that's what's halted some things in the past, but you're talking like broad, vast, complicated, like real change. And climate is one of probably the many things that is really a great example of the need for it. Yeah.
I just want to, it is a wonderful question, and I will say that you as Harvard students are positioned to push the system. It won't completely change overnight, but it was my peers, my classmates at Hugsy who were off starting the charter movement and the high accounting. I'm so sorry. Not for charters, but we did standards and we did No Child Left. Oh, I'm so sorry. Anyway, we really were, but we shifted things. We thought we were doing it for the right reasons. There were a lot of people from Hugsy and from the business school and all sorts of places, who were moving together to shift the system. You're in a place right now that can do that. You have a lot of power, and so make connections with your classmates and stay connected and don't lose that vision.
Yeah.
Because I do think we're in a place where education needs to come back. We need to come back from this hyper-siloed, hyper-standardized testing environment. And it's just time to, and that pendulum won't swing on its own, right? We need people to push it. And you're those people. So I look forward to seeing what happens.
Yeah.
I know I took a class here at Hugsy where we talked about ed policy, and then I remember there was a paper on scalable ed reform. I don't know if you type it up, maybe you'll find it. I can't remember exactly what it is, but it looked into big education reforms that have happened and noted that a couple of parallels of them, and there was a case that you can have a scalable version, but there were niche reforms where there's you have you start small with a charter school and see how that works, and then highlight it as a model, and then figuring out. But it's super complicated to what you're proposing is probably the way we should be doing things. But can you imagine how does that look like? That means colleges have to change the way that they're looking at students coming in. That means teachers have to change the way that they're being trained. That means everything has to shift. So I think but these things do happen. So there's a really good paper on that. And then, yeah.
One thing that'll help is green jobs. As all these jobs become green jobs, all of a sudden, we have to prepare kids to do these jobs. So what sorts of changes are we going to do to actually prepare kids for life? And I think that's a major catalyst that hasn't stepped into its full effect yet, but it's coming. It's coming. And that economics is a key driver for a lot of things, especially here, right? So if that is going to help dictate some of these larger, broad sweeping changes, again, this stuff is going to take time, but it will become essential at some point. At least I think. I don't know if anybody else thinks that, but that's
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's what we're thinking about in terms of higher education and how do we equip future leaders with the skills that they're going to need. And we're taking an interdisciplinary approach, which is, we can talk later about that. But as we wrap up, you've all shared some incredible wisdom from your own personal lives, from the work that you're doing on the ground. Could could you share one more piece of wisdom and advice you have for students here and alumni, for those interested in working in K-12 climate and sustainability education or currently doing so? What would you like to leave us with?
Just one piece of it. Oh man.
It doesn't have to be just one. It could be, a couple.
I think that there's a really good opportunity. I know there's going to be this a lot of like career expo sometime in November.
November 1st.
November 1st.
You're gonna be there?
Yes. And I think like if you want to, like, I think the best way to figure out what the space looks like is to actually try to like work with an organization in that space. So going to that expo would be great. And the thing is, like, a lot of us, like, in that space, at least, and maybe I'm just speaking for myself, it's like, well, we definitely have limited resources, but we also don't, we're running so fast that it's hard to we do have an intern program though, but like it's hard to like make a position up for like different people. But I think you could go in there, be curious, ask like what are the biggest like pain points, like blockers you face, and then maybe try seeing if you can work in those organizations. I think that like basically hands-on is probably the best way to figure out what the space looks like.
I agree. Experience is key. I mean, education is paramount. Experience is key. Not really. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm still the kid that begged to scrub fish tanks when I was like 14 years old.
Yeah, do what Meredith did, but I mean, expo.
Yeah, but it's the same thing. I do that now. I still do that just in very different ways, right? Still banging down doors. When I was trying to figure out what program I wanted to go to overseas, I mean, I can't believe that people actually responded to me, but I like cold emailed professors from like well-known universities all around the world, and just was like, hi, I'm a freshman in college, and blah, blah, blah. And you know what? You'd be surprised. A lot of them emailed me back, and I just asked very earnest questions. I'm trying to figure out what I'm doing, how to do it, where do I go, who else should I talk to? And I'm telling you, those little nuggets I grabbed on, and I just think that at the end of the day, like, very simple things, like, basic curiosity is really good to have and try to maintain every single day. Every day, I say two things, like, I always want to be learning, because I feel like, you gotta keep the brain sharp, but it really is so important, and I love it. It keeps us really going ahead, but what was my other one now? See, now I can't remember. But really be curious, and don't be afraid of hard work. I've been in a lot of situations where, especially as we've grown and scaled, I get asked to do crazy things, it's like, and we do a lot of things, but at the end of the day, I'm not gonna get embroiled in political things. I'm not gonna be in tomorrow's news for some scandal, because very simply, I maintain integrity with every single thing that I do. If anybody has to ever question, oh, well, how did you do that and why? Yep, go ahead, ask me, I'll tell you, let's talk about it. But it's asking questions and not being afraid. I've had many times throughout much of my career where, including my first day in New York City, walking into an actual room with a gigantic old school wooden conference table that was about 70 feet long, surrounded by 100 chairs. I was the only female. This wasn't that long ago. And I just walked in like, hey guys, what's up? I think our own sort of concerns with ourselves, our own kind of, it's just yours. It's not really everybody else's. So, with sustainability and climate, oftentimes we're the only person in the room, especially when I was in facilities. They're like, who is this new person? Who's the only woman? And she's doing sustainability? What is she going to make us do? That's what they all thought. They just ran for the hills at first. But then started working every single day, asking questions, trying to understand what it is that they do, how they do it. I learned from that, and that's how we build programs. Okay, I know what they need. let's do something to address that. That's really fundamentally what I do every single day. It's listening, recalibrating, refining continuously. But again, it's just driven by that basic, like, we're interested in this stuff and we want to try to make it better. But we're also trying to spark these things in others that we're hoping the world has more of, period.
I would just say that it's cliche, but don't ask for permission. Ask for forgiveness later. Every job you walk into, it will feel like there are all these boxes around what you're allowed to do, but they aren't really there. They're just make-believe.
Yeah.
You just think they're there, they're not really there. So you can just go do what you need to do.
Fantastic.
Yeah, sometimes people are just scared and they just don't want to go outside the box. Don't be scared.
It's a fantastic note to end on, so please join me in a round of applause for